The rain over Pacific Command's orbital shipyard fell in sheets of silver, a thin veil between the steel bones of the future and the blue planet below. Through the massive observation panels, Admiral Elias Rourke stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the storm roll over the ocean far beneath. The shipyard floated in geosynchronous orbit above Hawaii, its docking arms stretching like fingers into the void. Beyond them hung the silhouette, no, the shadow of humanity's most audacious creation. The Hurricane-class battleship had no name yet. Officially, it was designated THS-001 in Terran naval records. Unofficially, whispers through the fleet called it the Storm Made Steel. It was larger than any vessel humanity had ever dared to build, a fusion of technologies wrestled from centuries of trial, failure, and bitter victories. From bow to stern, the Hurricane stretched nearly 3 kilometers, armored in metamaterial plating that bent light and absorbed kinetic force as though it were a living thing. Yet size alone was never humanity's true weapon. Every race that underestimated mankind learned that lesson too late. The Hurricane's hull bore no banners, no ornate markings, only the small, unassuming crest of the Terran fleet, and beneath it a simple phrase engraved into the metal: Audir est vincere, to dare is to win. Admiral Rourke's reflection stared back at him in the glass, lined with the weight of years. He had fought in the Arcadia conflict, where human colony fleets were hunted like prey through asteroid fields. He had commanded during the Clithian incursion, where Earth's orbital defenses were tested to breaking by enemies who believed humans lacked the resolve to fight to the last man. Those memories were etched into him like scars, but they also carved a truth he never forgot. Humanity never stopped adapting. Every loss was a lesson. Every wound was a blueprint for a better weapon, and the Hurricane was the culmination of all of them. Outside, the ship's final power tests began. Its quantum reactors thrummed to life, sending a vibration through the docking arms that could be felt even within the observation deck. Along the keel, the gravitic projectors pulsed, preparing to warp space like a sculptor bending clay. The weapon arrays, hidden for now, were capable of delivering kinetic strikes that could crack moons or pinpoint surgical bombardments without collateral damage. Humanity had learned that power without discipline was just destruction. The Hurricane was not built to burn the galaxy. It was built to ensure the galaxy never burned humanity again. "Admiral," came a voice from his left. Commander Juno Hale, his second-in-command, stepped forward with a datapad. "Command authority just transmitted. All systems passed inspection. The Hurricane is cleared for operational deployment." Rourke's gaze stayed fixed on the battleship. "And the Council?" he asked. Hale hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "They are concerned. They think unveiling this ship will provoke the Syndic worlds into accelerating their own military programs." A faint, humorless smile touched Rourke's mouth. "The Syndic worlds have been accelerating since before the ink dried on the armistice. We don't provoke them by existing. We provoke them by surviving." It was a lesson too many in the Galactic Council failed to grasp. For centuries, humanity had been a second-tier power, respected for its stubbornness, dismissed for its relative youth among the stars. The Council preferred a balance, an equilibrium where no single race could dominate. But history taught Rourke that balance was an illusion crafted by those who already held power. The moment you threatened that order, you became the enemy. A flicker of lightning lit the clouds far below, mirrored by a subtle glint along the Hurricane's hull as its stealth matrix adjusted. It wasn't just a ship. It was a statement, one that said humanity no longer relied on the Council's goodwill or anyone's permission to defend itself. "Prepare the crew," Rourke ordered quietly. "She launches in 36 hours. The next day blurred into a storm of activity. Hundreds of crew members moved aboard, their boots ringing on freshly forged decks. Engineers made final calibrations to the ship's neural link interface, a system allowing the captain to sync with the Hurricane's battle AI, not as master and servant, but as two halves of the same mind. It was a technology considered too dangerous by other races who feared losing control to their own creations. Humanity saw it differently. Trust forged in fire could turn fear into power. Among the boarding crew was Lieutenant Cale Mercer, the youngest helmsman ever assigned to a capital ship. His father had died in the siege of Vega when Cale was still a boy. Standing on the bridge for the first time, he could feel the pulse of the ship under his boots, as if the hurricane recognized its new guardians. He whispered under his breath, almost as a vow, "We'll make them think twice." Far away in the shadow of the Karthik Nebula, fleets gathered. The Syndic worlds had been watching the construction of the hurricane for years through espionage and intercepted transmissions. In their war councils, they spoke of the Terrans with a mix of contempt and unease. They had crushed empires older and richer than humanity. What made Earth think it could stand against them? Yet somewhere in those councils, a voice would always rise to remind them. The Terrans had a way of making impossible wars theirs to win. As the hurricane systems came fully online, Admiral Rourke walked her main corridor, his hand trailing along the cool metal of the bulkheads. Every rivet, every circuit was paid for in blood, human blood. This was not just a ship of war. It was a promise that when the next storm came, humanity would not cower. It would meet the tempest head-on. 36 hours later, the launch was unlike any other in fleet history. From the viewing bays of Pacific Command, thousands of civilians, dignitaries, and veterans gathered. The great docking arms released their hold, and the hurricane drifted free, her engines igniting with a low, resonant hum that seemed to echo in the bones. Slowly, she turned toward the black horizon. In that moment, every watching heart understood something unspoken. The galaxy might not welcome humanity's rise, but it could no longer deny it. The hurricane class was here, and storms do not ask permission before they break. The hurricane's maiden voyage began without fanfare in the void between stars. No ceremonial escort, no blazing announcement to the Galactic Council. Just the silent slipstream hum of her gravitic drives as she cut across the darkness like a blade through still water. Admiral Rourke stood on the bridge, hands gripping the command rail, eyes on the tactical display. To most officers, the first mission of a super-capital ship would be a patrol through safe space, a slow cruise meant to test systems. But this was not most ships, and this was not most times. Entering the Dithra corridor, reported Lieutenant Mercer from the helm. His voice was steady, but there was a tautness beneath it, like a bowstring drawn to its limit. All systems stable, cloak integrity at 98%, no sign of Syndic activity, yet. The Dithra corridor was a narrow ribbon of navigable space between two massive pulsars. It was also the fastest route to the Coreward sectors, territory that had been raided twice in the last year by Syndic strike fleets. The Council had filed protests. The Syndic worlds had laughed, and the Terran fleet had been told to stay out of it. Long-range scan, Rourke ordered. Holographic light rippled above the bridge table, revealing a swath of space ahead. At first, it was empty. Then, slowly, signatures appeared, faint, predatory. Commander Hale stepped closer, eyes narrowing. Contact, multiple contacts. Formation pattern matches Syndic hunter-killers. 23 vessels, maybe more in sensor shadow. They're running cold. Rourke said nothing for a long moment. He simply watched the display, the hunter-killers holding position like wolves on the edge of firelight. He knew what this was, a test. The Syndics wanted to see if the rumors about the hurricane were true. "Helm," Rourke said at last, "maintain course. Let them come to us." It was a dangerous choice, one that would have made any council observer blanch. But Rourke understood something the council didn't. Predators didn't fear prey that ran. They feared prey that didn't move at all. Minutes passed. The hunter-killers began to shift, forming an intercept arc. Their hulls were blacker than the void, their engines whisper quiet. They were built to ambush. Against any other vessel, the tactic would have worked. "Admiral, they're closing to strike range," Hale said. "Drop cloak," Rourke replied. The hurricane emerged from invisibility with a shimmer, her matte hull drinking in the pale light of distant stars. The sudden reveal was not a defensive act, it was a statement. "Signal them," Rourke ordered. "Open channel all bands." The comms officer glanced back. "Sir, they are jamming." "Then override it. Punch through." A burst of coded Terran signal flooded the corridor. Against the Syndic's best countermeasures, it carried like a thunderclap. "This is Terran Hurricane. You have one chance to turn away." For a heartbeat, there was no response. Then the Syndic fleet lit their drives in unison, Predator's teeth bared. Rourke's jaw set. "Engage Storm Protocol." The ship seemed to take a breath. Deep within her armored heart, the Hurricane's battle AI came fully online, merging seamlessly with the command inputs. Energy surged through her power grid. Along her keel, concealed weapon housings unfolded like the wings of some ancient warbird. "Targeting solutions locked," Mercer reported, his voice quieter now, as if in awe. "Fire!" There was no roar in space, no blinding muzzle flash, just an eerie, precise violence. The Hurricane's main spinal cannon tore reality in a straight line, a gravitic lance bending mass and momentum alike. The first Syndic cruiser vanished, imploded into itself as if swallowed by an invisible fist. The rest of the volley followed in an elegant, ruthless rhythm. Kinetic slugs, each the size of a Terran bus, accelerated to a fraction of light speed and passed clean through Syndic destroyers, leaving them to break apart in silence. Swarms of drone fighters launched from hidden bays, their black hulls glinting only briefly before they cut into the enemy's formation. It wasn't a battle, it was a dismantling, but Rourke was no butcher. "Cease fire," he ordered after the 12th confirmed kill. "Transmit withdrawal vector to survivors." On the tactical display, the remaining Syndic ships hesitated, then peeled away, scattering into the shadows between stars. The message had been sent. Silence settled over the bridge. The crew exchanged looks, some exhilarated, some sobered by the magnitude of what they'd just done. Rourke turned away from the display, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Remember this. We could have annihilated them all. We didn't. The day we forget restraint is the day we become the thing we fight." It was a truth few admirals spoke aloud, but one every soldier should know. Power without morality was just another form of tyranny. Humanity's rise would mean nothing if it came at the cost of its soul. The Hurricane turned on her new heading, engines whispering as she slipped back into cloak. The galaxy would whisper of this engagement for decades, embellishing the details, inventing its own myths. But those who had been there, the survivors on both sides, would remember something else. They would remember the day a Terran battleship appeared from nowhere, shattered a fleet and vanished again, leaving only the echo of a warning in their minds. And far across the stars, in the Syndic High Council chambers, the strategists who once dismissed humanity as an upstart race now stared at the reports in uneasy silence. Because storms could be predicted, tracked, even evaded. But a hurricane could only be endured. The Galactic Council chamber was never meant to feel small. It was a sprawling arena suspended above the city world of Virelian Prime, ringed by tiered seats for the representatives of over 300 member civilizations. The vaulted ceiling projected an ever-shifting tapestry of starfields, a reminder that this chamber claimed to speak for the galaxy itself. Yet on this day, it felt suffocating. Ambassador Rhys Sloane, Earth's senior envoy to the Council, stood at the central podium. Her dark eyes swept the tiers of alien faces, some unreadable, some openly hostile. The air was thick with the muted murmurs of translation devices. She could feel the weight of the last week pressing in on her, the whispers, the reports, the recordings that had already been replayed in every corner of the known worlds. The Hurricane's first engagement had reached the Council faster than even Rourke's own report. Syndic survivors had painted it as an act of deliberate provocation, a violation of neutrality in the Dithra corridor. They left out the part where they had initiated the interception. "The facts are simple," Sloane said into the crystalline voice amplifiers. "A Terran vessel lawfully deployed was targeted by an unprovoked Syndic fleet. We defended ourselves and we allowed the survivors to leave. No civilian assets were harmed. No territories were invaded. This was restraint, not aggression. From the Lakathi delegation, High Speaker Velrath's tendrils twitched in agitation. Restraint! The Syndic worlds have submitted sensor logs showing the annihilation of 12 warships in under 3 minutes. That is not restraint, Ambassador Sloan. That is overkill. Overkill, Sloan repeated evenly, is the difference between losing one ship and losing the war that would have followed. A ripple of voices moved through the chamber. On the high dais, Council Chair Orthene, a long-lived species with crystalline skin that refracted light into shifting colors, leaned forward. Ambassador, the hurricane represents a concentration of military power unprecedented in your species' history. Many here view such a weapon as a destabilizing threat to the balance of the Council. Sloan kept her voice calm, though inside she could feel the strain pulling at her. The balance you speak of has never protected us. When our colonies burned, when Syndic raiders slaughtered thousands, the Council issued statements. We buried the dead. The hurricane is not a threat to peace. It is a promise that humanity will no longer depend on the goodwill of those who only act when it is convenient. The words landed like steel on stone. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. Others stared with cold disdain. In the shadows of the chamber's upper tier, Syndic envoys watched without speaking. They didn't need to. The damage was being done for them. The more the Council feared the hurricane, the more isolated Earth would become. Far above Virelian Prime, on the hurricane itself, Rurk was already anticipating the political backlash. He stood in the war room with Commander Hale, reviewing incoming intelligence packets. "They're moving faster than we thought," Hale said, highlighting a data feed. 3 separate blocks calling for a weapons limitation treaty. Unofficially, it's aimed at us. Rurk grunted. "A treaty that limits the one weapon we've built capable of leveling the field. How convenient." "It's worse," Hale added. "We've got chatter about an internal motion to place the hurricane under joint council oversight. They want to take her out of our hands entirely." For a long moment, Rurk stared at the holo table, watching the shifting lines of projected fleet movements. He had seen this pattern before, not in politics, but in war. Pressure from all sides meant to box you in before you could strike. "They won't get her," he said at last. "Not while I command." But holding the hurricane would not just be a matter of defiance. It would mean confronting the uncomfortable truth that had haunted humanity for centuries. That in the eyes of the great powers, Earth's rise would always be something to fear, never something to welcome. Back in the council chamber, the debate dragged into its 3rd hour. Sloan held her ground against accusations of militarism, colonial ambition, and destabilization. She reminded them of Earth's record, its decades of trade agreements, peacekeeping operations, and humanitarian missions to worlds that other council members ignored. But she could feel the narrative slipping. The Syndics had allies in this chamber, and they were winning the battle of perception. It was during a recess that the message reached her, an encrypted burst from Rurk, stripped down to a single sentence. "They will move against us within days. Be ready." Sloan closed her eyes for a moment, then reopened them with steel in her gaze. She understood the implication. The next stage would not be fought with words alone. On the hurricane's bridge, Rurk looked out into the dark and thought about storms, not the kind that howled through Earth's skies, but the kind that built in silence, pressure rising until something had to break. And across the stars, in Syndic war foundries, new ships slid from their docks. They had heard the warning the hurricane delivered. They had decided to answer it. This time they would not come to test her. They would come to kill her. The alert reached Admiral Rurk before the sun rose over the Pacific. Not that the concept of sunrise meant much aboard the hurricane. Her clocks ran on fleet standard time, unmoored from any single planet. But the message carried a weight that transcended hours. Multiple hostile fleets detected. Vector, Sol system. Rurk's boots struck the deck plates with a clipped rhythm as he strode into the command deck. Commander Hale was already there, her posture rigid, eyes locked on the tactical holo. Red icons bloomed across the map like a spreading infection. "They're not even hiding," Hale said grimly. We've confirmed Syndic signatures, but they're not alone. Fragments from 3 other fleets, all officially neutral powers. Looks like someone's been recruiting. Rourke took in the formation. It wasn't a blitz. This was an encirclement, a slow tightening of the noose. Numbers: 73 confirmed capital ships, hundreds of escorts, at least 2 carriers. They're advancing in 3 converging columns. Projected time to Sol: 18 standard hours if they maintain current speed. That gives us very little room for error. Rourke didn't answer immediately. The Hurricane had been designed for unmatched firepower and strategic reach, but even she could be overwhelmed by enough enemies at once. And this wasn't a skirmish. This was a message. "They want to take her in Sol orbit," Hale said softly, "right where the whole galaxy can watch." The words settled like lead. This wasn't just about destruction, it was about humiliation. Rourke straightened. "Signal Fleet Command. We are intercepting before they reach the system. Helm, set course for the Kepler Rift." The rift was an expanse of warped space and unstable gravity wells, avoided by most navies because conventional formations couldn't maneuver through it safely. But the Hurricane's gravitic projectors could dance through the rift like a bird through a canyon. If the enemy wanted a public execution, Rourke would give them a shadow war instead. Within minutes, the Hurricane slid into slipspace, her drives a deep, almost living hum beneath the crew's feet. On the bridge, Lieutenant Mercer kept his eyes on the navigation displays, threading the ship between shifting gravitational eddies. In the war room, Rourke stood with his senior officers around a holo of the rift. "We're not going to meet them head-on. We'll fracture their formation before they even know we're here. Hit the lead ships, vanish, hit again. They can't coordinate if they are looking over their shoulders." Hale nodded. "Storm tactics, no sustained engagement until they've bled momentum." It was a dangerous approach, one that would require flawless timing. But in war, Rourke had learned a brutal truth. If you fight by your enemy's rules, you're already halfway to losing. Hours later, the Hurricane emerged from slipspace into the swirling blue haze of the rift. Space itself seemed to ripple around her hull. Sensors lit up with the enemy's vanguard, a Syndic battle group running point for the rest of the Coalition fleet. "Engage Cloak," Rourke ordered. The Hurricane's outline dissolved into nothing, leaving only the distortion of bent light. The first strike came without warning. A gravitic lance cut through the void, bending the lead Syndic cruiser until its spine snapped like glass. Kinetic rounds followed, punching through 2 destroyers before their shields even cycled to full power. By the time the rest of the vanguard reacted, the Hurricane was gone, already slipping between the rift's shifting wells. From the bridge, Mercer grinned. "They are scattering, trying to track us." Rourke's eyes stayed fixed on the tactical display. "Good. Confusion is the sharpest blade in our arsenal." The Hurricane struck again 20 minutes later, this time from below the enemy's plane of approach. Drone wings surged from her bays, diving into the disoriented escorts and tearing at their flanks. Every kill was surgical, fast, decisive, without waste. And every time the Coalition tried to rally, the Hurricane vanished into the rift's folds. But the enemy was not without skill. After the 3rd strike, they began laying gravitic mines, trying to predict the Hurricane's movements. Rourke adjusted tactics, weaving through tighter corridors, forcing the crew to trust their instruments over their instincts. It was in one of those narrow runs that the Coalition made its boldest move. 3 capital ships cut across the rift's hazard line, their shields flaring against the gravitational stress, blocking the Hurricane's exit vector. "Sir," Hale said sharply, "they're boxing us in." Rourke didn't hesitate. "All power to forward shields, load Stormbreakers." The Stormbreaker cannons were the Hurricane's most dangerous weapons. Used only when escape was no longer an option. They fired not projectiles, but concentrated bursts of folded space collapse, brief, controlled tears in reality itself. "Fire!" The rift screamed. A hole opened where the blocking ships had been, reality snapping back with a shockwave that shredded their hulls into molten debris. The Hurricane surged through the gap, her engines burning hard. The Coalition had lost nearly a quarter of its vanguard in less than 2 hours. The rest slowed, wary now of chasing too far into the rift. On the bridge, silence hung for a long moment. The crew knew what they'd just done, not just tactically, but strategically. This battle would be studied for years, not just as a display of firepower, but of a single truth, that in the hands of the right crew, the Hurricane was not a ship to be cornered. Rourke looked out into the blue haze, voice steady but low. They came to make us an example. Now they'll spend the rest of this campaign wondering which one of them is next. But even as the enemy retreated to regroup, Rourke knew the war had only begun. The Council would call this escalation. The Syndics would call it defiance. And humanity would call it survival. The rift was behind them, but the shadows of the battle still clung to the crew. In the quiet after the fight, engineers moved like ghosts through the Hurricane's corridors, checking systems, patching micro-fractures in the armor, recalibrating the gravitic drives. On the bridge, the smell of recycled air and heated circuitry lingered. Admiral Rourke sat in the captain's chair, staring at the tactical display. The Coalition fleet had broken off pursuit, but not in disorder. No, this retreat had the precision of a predator repositioning for a second strike. Commander Hale approached with a data pad. Fleet Command confirms our assessment. Coalition forces have regrouped near the Helios expanse. They're not coming straight at Sol this time. They are waiting. Rourke didn't look up. Waiting for what? Hale hesitated. Intel from our deep space relays picked up chatter. They've put out a bounty, not just for the Hurricane, but for you personally. Whoever disables or captures this ship gets carte blanche from the Syndic worlds, full military support for any operation. Rourke allowed himself a grim smile. So now I'm a prize in their hunt. Hale set the datapad down. It's worse. They're leaking false reports to lure us into the Helios expanse. Civilian transports under attack, distress calls planted on council channels. They know we won't ignore it. The Helios expanse was an open wound in space, an expanse of ionized gas clouds and electromagnetic storms that could blind sensors and cripple ships. It was perfect for an ambush. Rourke stood, pacing toward the bridge viewport. Beyond the armored glass, stars glimmered coldly, indifferent to the games of fleets and politics. The Council will expect us to investigate. If we don't, they'll call us aggressors avoiding responsibility. If we do, we walk straight into the trap, Hale finished. Rourke turned back to the crew. Prepare a reconnaissance pattern. We'll go in quiet, see what's real and what's bait. The Hurricane slipped into the expanse under full cloak. The gas clouds loomed in shifting colors, violet, crimson, deep indigo, swirling in slow, lethal beauty. Electromagnetic spikes flickered across the sensor boards like distant lightning. Minutes turned into hours as they drifted deeper. The distress signals grew stronger, but they were inconsistent. One moment urgent, the next distorted into static. Admiral Mercer called from the helm, I've got a faint visual on the supposed transport convoy. 6 ships, no escorts, they are stationary. Hale frowned. That's wrong. If they were under attack, they'd be maneuvering. Bring them on the main display, Rourke ordered. The holo bloomed into shape. 6 transports hung in formation, their hulls pristine, no scorch marks, no shield flares, too pristine. Rourke's eyes narrowed. Magnify. As the image sharpened, the truth came into focus. The transports were empty hulls, shells of ships with no engines, no crews, and nestled between them, hidden in the sensor shadow, was a Syndic dreadnought, its weapons already aligned. Evasive, Rourke barked. The first volley lanced through the gas clouds, lighting the Hurricane's shields in a burst of white. The impact rattled the ship, and for the first time since her launch, the Hurricane's systems showed strain. Multiple warp signatures. Hale shouted over the alarms. They're all around us, forming a kill sphere. On the tactical map, red icons flared into being. 10, 20, 30 ships closing fast. Rourke steadied himself against the command rail. Helm, bring us to Vector 215, maximum gravitic thrust. Weapons full spread, suppressing fire. The Hurricane surged forward, plasma lances and kinetic slugs ripping into the encircling ships. But for every enemy that fell, 2 more moved into position. The trap was tightening. They're forcing us toward the central storm front, Hale realized. If they can pin us in there, the radiation will fry our systems. Not if we make the storm our weapon first, Rourke replied. The crew stared, then understood. The central storm was a maelstrom of charged particles, enough to disable any ship caught in its heart. It was a no-go zone for every fleet, unless you had a ship designed to bend the laws of physics. Rourke's voice was steady. Plot a course through the storm core. We'll drag them in behind us. The maneuver was madness, but the hurricane was built for madness. Her gravitic shields flared to maximum, creating a cocoon of warped space as she plunged into the storm. Lightning arced across the void, painting the hull in ghostly light. Behind them, the coalition ships followed, thinking they had her cornered. Then the storm struck. Radiation bursts flayed their shields. Ion surges fried targeting arrays. One by one, the pursuing ships fell silent, their drives sputtering out. The hurricane emerged on the other side, battered but alive. Only a handful of coalition vessels limped away from the storm's edge. On the bridge, the crew exhaled as one. Hale turned to Rourke. That was a risk no sane commander would take. Rourke met her gaze. Wars aren't won by the sane. They are won by the ones who refuse to let the enemy write the rules. As the hurricane set course for Sol, the comms officer handed Rourke a new transmission. It was from Ambassador Sloan, her face tight with urgency. They're calling it an unprovoked attack in the expanse. The Council's convening an emergency session. Rourke, they are pushing for a vote to strip Earth of autonomous military authority. If it passes, they'll take the hurricane. Rourke stared at the message in silence, then looked out into the stars. The war was no longer just about survival. Now it was about who would control the storm. The Galactic Council's emergency session unfolded under a veil of manufactured urgency. Every channel across the Coreward worlds broadcast the chamber's live feed, projecting the glittering tiers of alien delegates into millions of homes and military command centers. The message was deliberate. Whatever decision was made here would be a spectacle, not a debate. Ambassador Reese Sloan stood at her podium, the only human in the sea of alien eyes. Her voice was calm, but her mind moved like a knife through fog. The events in the Helios expanse, she began, were not a show of unprovoked aggression. They were survival. Every sensor log, every tactical recording proves the coalition initiated the ambush. Yet the resolution before you ignores this, focusing instead on stripping Earth of its ability to defend itself. High Speaker Velrath of the Lakathi delegation rose, his tendrils curling in calculated disdain. Earth's defense is not in question. The hurricane is. No single vessel should hold the capacity to destabilize multiple sectors. In the wrong hands, it could shatter the very peace this council was founded to maintain. Peace, Sloane's tone hardened. Peace that exists only because the powerful permit it. That is not peace. That is a leash. A ripple of translated murmurs moved through the chamber. From the high dais, Council Chair Orthene lifted a crystalline hand. The vote will proceed. The resolution is clear. Terran military command of the hurricane will be ceded to a joint council authority. This ship will be reclassified as a peacekeeping asset under collective control. Sloane's chest tightened. She knew the mathematics of council politics. Earth did not have the votes to block the resolution. This was not a hearing, it was a verdict. Above Virelian Prime, in high orbit, the hurricane hung in silent readiness. On her bridge, Admiral Rourke received the encrypted transcript of the session as it unfolded. Hale stood beside him, reading the same words on her display. "They're going to take her," she said quietly. "Legally, politically, they'll claim jurisdiction and send a delegation to board." Rourke's gaze never left the stars beyond the viewport. If they control the hurricane, they control the only weapon that's kept the syndics from dictating the terms of this war. "And if you defy them," Hale asked, "you'll make us enemies of the council itself." Rourke finally turned, his eyes dark but steady. The council was never united. It's an arena where the strong keep the weak obedient. The syndics have always understood that. They've been playing the long game. Now they're using the Council's rules to do what they couldn't accomplish in battle. The comms officer's voice broke in. "Admiral, we have an incoming transmission, Priority 1, from Ambassador Sloan." Her image appeared, sharp and urgent. "Elias, they've passed the vote. A Council fleet is en route to assume control of the Hurricane. Officially, you are ordered to stand down and prepare for inspection. Unofficially," she hesitated, "you have about 7 hours before they reach your position." Silence held the bridge. The crew exchanged tense glances, the unspoken question hanging between them. Rourke's voice was low, but it carried through every deck. "Helm, plot a jump route, not to Sol, not to any registered base, somewhere off every chart they have." Hale stepped closer. "If we do this, there's no going back. We'll be deserters, worse, rogues. The media will make us pirates. The Council will brand us traitors." Rourke nodded. "I know, and every one of you has the right to step off this ship before we move. No shame, no charges. But if you stay, we're not just fighting for Earth anymore. We're fighting to keep the Hurricane in the hands of people who understand what she was built for." The silence stretched, then Mercer at the helm straightened. "With all due respect, Admiral, I signed on to fly this ship, not surrender her." One by one voices rose from the bridge stations. "I'm in. Count me in. No way I'm letting them take her." Hale allowed herself a faint smile. "Looks like your crew has made up its mind." Rourke turned back to the viewport. "Then we're leaving the Council's leash behind. Engage jump drive." The Hurricane's engines flared, their gravitic fields bending light itself as she slipped into the dark between mapped stars. When the Council fleet arrived hours later, they found only empty space and the fading distortion of a jump signature too erratic to trace. From that moment, the Hurricane was no longer a vessel of the Terran fleet, nor an asset of the Council. She was something else entirely, a free blade, a storm untethered. In the Council chamber, the news of her disappearance sent shockwaves through the delegates. Velrath of the Lakathi hissed into his private comms, relaying the message to Syndic strategists. "They've gone rogue. Hunt them down." And somewhere in the uncharted deep, Rourke stood on the Hurricane's bridge looking into the void ahead. "They'll come for us," Hale said. "They'll try," Rourke replied. "But you can't leash a hurricane." The jump had carried the Hurricane far beyond the reach of known patrol routes, into a region of space the charts marked only as the Varan Shallows. It was a graveyard of failed colonies, abandoned habitats drifting in slow arcs, moons scarred by ancient bombardment, stations without power where the shadows never moved. For weeks, the crew kept the ship dark. No transmissions, no sensor pings. Even the engines were cold except for brief bursts to reposition among the derelicts. To the Council, the Hurricane had vanished into myth. To the Syndics, she had become a ghost to hunt. But ghosts have their uses. Rourke stood in the war room, staring at a faint relay feed picked up by passive sensors. A cluster of civilian freighters was under attack near the Deneb Rift, raiders flying the colors of the Karth Dominion, a Syndic-aligned client state. The freighters were unarmed, carrying food and medicine to outlying colonies that had no political leverage in the Council. Hale entered quietly. "If we respond, we risk giving away our position. The Council's hunters could pick up the engagement." Rourke didn't look away from the display. "And if we don't, those freighters don't make it home." Hale's silence was answer enough. They had both seen it before, the way the big powers let the small ones bleed so long as the balance of trade wasn't disrupted. "Bring us in on a silent approach," Rourke ordered. "Minimal signature. I want those raiders thinking they're safe until it's far too late." The Hurricane ghosted into the rift's outer edge, her gravitic cloak blending her hull into the background distortions. On the main display, the raiders toyed with the freighters, firing just enough to cripple but not destroy, drawing out the chase. "Target priority, disable engines and weapons," Rourke said. "No kills unless they force our hand." When the Hurricane struck, it was like a shadow solidifying into steel. Her cannons fired in precise pulses, severing engine housings and melting weapon mounts without touching crew compartments. Raiders spun out of control, drifting powerless. The freighter's captains, stunned, began transmitting thanks on every frequency. Rourke ignored them, ordering the hurricane back into cloak before reinforcements could arrive. By the time the Karth Dominion dispatched warships to investigate, all they found were disabled raiders and a vanished phantom. It should have ended there, but a week later, encrypted transmissions began reaching the hurricane, pleas from other border colonies, outlying stations, and forgotten worlds. They spoke of Syndic raids, Dominion blockades, Council neglect, and in their words was a dangerous seed. They believed the hurricane could protect them where the law had failed. Hale was the first to voice the concern aloud. If we start answering these calls, we stop being a rogue warship and start being a resistance. That's not just defiance, it's a movement. The Council will see it as rebellion. Rourke studied the incoming requests. Most were from places with no strategic value, no resources worth fighting over, just people who wanted to live without fear. Sometimes rebellion is just what people call the act of standing when you're told to kneel, he said. The crew voted unanimously to act. Over the next month, the hurricane began moving along unpredictable arcs through the outer sectors, hitting Syndic supply lines, breaking blockades, and vanishing before enemy fleets could respond. Her reputation grew faster than her actual engagements, fed by rumor and by those who had seen her silhouette cut across the stars. But fame brought hunters. The Council dispatched its own task force under the pretext of stabilization operations. The Syndics doubled their bounty, and whispers began to circulate that someone inside the hurricane's crew might be feeding their pursuers fragments of their trail. It was after a raid on a Syndic fuel depot that the trap was sprung. As the hurricane exited slipspace into what should have been an empty system, her sensors lit up with hostile signatures, Council ships and Syndic warcraft together, arrayed in a half-moon formation. Hale's voice was tight. They've allied to catch us, and they're blocking every exit vector. Rourke stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. Then we break the net before it closes. The coming fight would not just decide the fate of the hurricane. It would decide whether she remained a symbol of hope or became a cautionary tale told in council chambers. And somewhere deep in the crew, the traitor listened to the Admiral's orders, already preparing the next betrayal. The system was a trap, but it was also a stage. On the hurricane's main display, the combined Syndic Council task force formed a vast, glittering crescent, their engines burning cold blue in the darkness. They had positioned themselves with surgical precision, herding the hurricane toward the center of the kill zone. Rourke stood on the command rail, scanning the tactical map. Behind him, the bridge crew worked in near silence, aware that every move now was the difference between survival and destruction. Hale's voice was steady but taut. All slipspace vectors blocked. Even our emergency jump would land us in interdiction fields. They've planned this for months. Which means, Rourke said, someone gave them the pattern of our jumps. The words hung heavy. A traitor in the crew wasn't suspicion anymore, it was certainty. Rourke didn't turn as he spoke. Comms isolate all internal channels. Nobody transmits without my command. They had minutes before the crescent closed in. Rourke's eyes traced the enemy formation again, and an idea began to take shape, dangerous, desperate, but the only one left. Hale, he said, remember the rift run? Her eyes widened. You want to break through the formation instead of away from it. If we run, they tighten the net, Rourke said. If we punch through, we split their line and open one corridor for escape. Mercer looked up from helm control. That's suicide unless we know exactly where their heavy guns are weakest. Rourke nodded toward Hale. We'll find out. The plan was simple in outline and brutal in execution. The hurricane would use her gravitic drives at overload, bending a corridor through the enemy's interdiction fields while simultaneously firing her storm breakers in a staggered pattern to disable the line ahead. But before they could move, Hale stepped closer to Rourke, her voice low. Elias, you think it's him, don't you? Rourke didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on Ensign Varon, the quiet, efficient comms officer who had been on every bridge shift since their exile began. Varon met his gaze without flinching, but there was something in the stillness of his face that Rurk recognized. He had seen it in captured Syndic officers before, the calm of someone who believed the battle's outcome was already decided. "Varen," Rurk said evenly, "step away from the console." The ensign hesitated a fraction too long. Hale moved like lightning, drawing her sidearm and covering him. "Why?" Mercer demanded. "Because," Rurk said, "he's been ghost-pinging our location to Syndic relays for weeks, and the moment we engage, he'll send them our firing solutions." Varen's mask broke into a thin smile. "You can't stop it now. Even if you escape here, they'll never stop hunting you. The Council, the Syndics, they'll burn every star you touch." Rurk's expression didn't change. "Maybe, but they'll remember the ones who made them bleed." With Varen escorted to the brig, the Hurricane powered up. Her cloak dropped, revealing her dark, angular form against the starfield. It was a challenge the enemy could not mistake. "Engage," Rurk ordered. The gravitic drive screamed, bending the very space in front of the Hurricane. Stormbreaker fire lanced out in precise intervals, punching ragged holes in the enemy line. Ships twisted in the collapse waves, their formations fraying under the sudden assault. The Hurricane plowed forward, shields flaring white-hot under concentrated fire. Hale called out impact reports, armor scorched, systems stressed but still holding. They broke the line in under 3 minutes. Behind them, the task force scrambled to reform, but the corridor was open. "Plot the jump," Rurk barked. As the Hurricane accelerated toward the slipspace threshold, enemy ships closed in from both flanks, desperate to collapse the escape vector. "Final volley," Rurk commanded. "Make it count." The Hurricane's guns roared one last time, kinetic slugs and gravitic lances tearing into the pursuing ships. Then the jump drive engaged, and the stars stretched into streaks before dissolving into the quiet of slipspace. When the crew finally exhaled, it was with the knowledge that they had not just survived, they had humiliated the most powerful alliance in the galaxy. In the quiet after the battle, Rurk addressed the crew. His voice carried not triumph, but something deeper. "They'll keep coming. They'll paint us as terrorists, pirates, criminals. But out there in the shadows between their empires, there are worlds that will hear the truth, that a single ship stood against the leash they call peace. And they'll know that sometimes the price of freedom is to live without a safe harbor." Hale stepped up beside him. "And what about us? Where do we go now?" Rurk looked into the endless stretch of slip space, his voice steady. "Wherever the storm is needed." And so the Hurricane sailed on, not as a vessel of any fleet, not as a servant to any banner, but as the embodiment of a choice the galaxy would never forget. Because you can cage a world. You can cage a fleet, but a hurricane can never be contained.